Good afternoon, I'm Jack Kartez from the Muskie School faculty. If you didn't sign in on your way in, please try to remember to on your way out at some point. That's appreciated. Today's meeting is one of a number of knowledge-building sessions about region-wide choices that affect sustainable prosperity for us here as part of the Sustain Southern Maine project. The Greater Portland Council of Governments, with involvement from the Southern Maine Regional Planning Commission, Cumberland County Government, and the Muskie School, was awarded one of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's region-based sustainable communities grants a couple of years ago, and our project is called Sustain Southern Maine. It's a partnership covering York and Cumberland counties geographically and currently involving representatives from more than 35 municipal governments, special purpose public agencies such as community action agencies and housing authorities, nonprofit service corporations such as Avesta Housing, and public interest organizations such as GrowSmart Maine. HUD's aim is to help further its 6 livability principles, which have to do with transportation choice, equitable and affordable housing, enhancing economic competitiveness, support of existing communities within metropolitan regions, and better leveraging of investment for sustainable growth across the public and private sectors and all levels of government. Today's session on future energy choices for Southern Maine highlights what those choices may be and is based on work both by the Greater Portland Council of Governments on behalf of Cumberland County and an energy study group of faculty and graduate students at the Muskie School with some support from Maine's National Science Foundation sponsored Sustainability Solutions Initiative. We have a lot to cover today, and I need to find my pointer. Where did it go? Where's the pointer? Oh, there it is. We have a lot to cover today, so I'll ask that you'll hold questions until we have an open discussion at the end of all of the presentations. We'll try to leave as much time as possible. We do have a pretty packed schedule today. We're going to first hear from Ben Lake, the Energy and Transit Program Analyst at GPCOG, on the results of the Cumberland County Energy and Emissions Inventory, which gives us a baseline of where we are now. And then from that point, we'll move on with an opening introduction by Charlie Colgan on the energy choice picture for Southern Maine. And Charlie has chaired a first-time energy seminar here within the Muskie School that involves all of the folks who you see noted to the right. And they will be discussing the results of each of their 4 teams' work on 4 major dimensions of energy choices for Southern Maine, on electricity choices with Nancy Varon being the presenter, on renewable energy choices locally with Caitlin Gerber as the presenter, on efficiencies that can be realized from the built environment with Abe Daly, and then finally transportation system efficiency potentials with Brian Hill and Dan Bishop sharing the presentation responsibilities. So Charlie will be bringing them up to the podium as each team revolves. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Colgan to open up. I'm going to turn it over to Ben Lake. Thanks, Charlie, to talk about the Cumberland County Emissions Inventory.
Thanks, Jack. All right. Thank you all for coming today. As Jack mentioned, my name is Ben Lake. I'm an Energy and Transit Program Analyst with the Greater Portland Council of Governments. And given that today's topic is energy choices, I wanted to come and speak to you for a little while about energy and emissions produced and used in Cumberland County. You may wonder, why are we interested in the amount of energy that's used and the emissions produced in Cumberland County, or even in general? Well, for starters, energy is expensive, and it's particularly expensive in Maine. In 2008, people of the state of Maine spent $6 billion on petroleum. And of that, $5 billion, about 85% of it, left the state in terms of revenues for other states or countries. In Maine, our energy spending equals about 14% of our gross domestic product, which is one of the highest rates in the country. That works out to over $5,000 per person every year spent on energy, which is the 7th highest energy expenditure per person in the United States. So, as a result of this spending, even minor savings in energy use can result in millions of dollars saved in Maine that can be put towards, quite frankly, a lot of other better purposes. There are a lot of other benefits to using less energy. For starters, advancing and developing alternative fuels and the infrastructure that go along with them, and improving energy efficiency can foster local economic growth. It can also, by reducing the amount of fuels that we burn to produce electricity and to power our transportation in our homes, improve air quality and improve public health as well. Finally, by reducing the amount of energy we use, we reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we produce and the contribution of our county to global climate change. And finally, as they say, you can't manage what you can't measure. So, in order to come up with a management plan for how to address our energy issues, we need to know what we're starting with as a baseline. So, we decided to inventory the entire of Cumberland County. So, basically runs from Scarborough all the way up to Brunswick, past Sebago Lake, and out to Bridgeton and Harrison. It's an area that has, at least in 2007, a population of about 275,000 people and about 115,000 households. In order to conduct this inventory, we picked a target year of 2007, which at the time was the most recent year that data was available for all of the sectors we needed to look at. We broke the county up into 5 major sectors, focusing on transportation, so vehicles, mostly automobiles, but also big commercial ships, residential, commercial, and industrial sectors, so the energy that's used in those buildings and the processes that go on in them, and also the waste sector. So that's basically emissions that are associated with landfilling or incinerating the trash that we produce in the county. We collected what we could of known data. So CMP was able to provide us with data on electrical usage in the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors, which was great. However, there are not a lot of data sources available for fuel consumption at the county level. So we had to estimate a lot of other things. We did that for regional fuel consumption using basically indirect sources of information. So for transportation, the Department of Transportation was able to give us estimates of the total mileage of all vehicle trips in Cumberland County, and then we were able to compare that with average fuel economies for the national fleet, and then come up with an estimate for the amount of energy that was used by the transportation sector. We also used average energy costs in 2007 in order to estimate how much all of this energy that we were using cost in the county. Once we had estimates of fuel consumption, we entered all of that information into software provided to us from the organization ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. And that software allowed us to do a few things. It took all of the different units and amounts of energy that were consumed in the county and leveled it out to a single unit of British thermal units, or BTUs. So it allowed us to compare directly between different sectors in terms of how much energy was being used. It also allowed us to convert the energy used into greenhouse gas emissions. There are a number of different greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is the most well known. There's also nitrous oxide and methane, among a lot of others, which have different greenhouse gas warming potentials. And so the software converted all of those into carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e values, so we can compare those as well. So after all of this, here's what we found. In 2007, the county consumed a total of 65 trillion BTUs of energy. That energy consumption emitted a total of 4.7 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions that year. And the total energy use resulted in a cost of about $1.36 billion in the county in 2007. That included graphs underneath that break down energy use, emissions, and energy costs for all of those by the different sectors that we were looking at. And one of the things you'll notice first is that automotive transportation takes up the single largest slice of the pie at about 40% of energy use and emissions, and nearly $600 million in terms of costs that year. That's followed by about a quarter of energy use, emissions, and cost by the residential sector, a little bit less for the commercial, and a smaller portion yet for industrial activities. Marine transportation, the big commercial shipping units go back and forth, made up about 5%, and that little slice right there represents the emissions associated with the trash that we incinerate in landfill in the county. Now, what I'd like to do next is just go through some of the different sectors and give you a little more clear idea of how those all look. So the transportation sector, the biggest slice of the pie, about 90% of all the energy use in this entire sector was due to our automobiles driving back and forth within the county. Most of that, about 75%, was from gasoline, about 15% from diesel. The remaining 11% was due to these large ships that move back and forth. And that's consumed in both diesel fuel and also residual fuel oil. In the residential sector, what you'll notice probably immediately is that heating oil, the energy that we use from heating oil, makes up over 55% of energy use and emissions of all the energy that we're using in our homes right now. When you combine that with other heating oils such as kerosene, natural gas, and propane and wood, what we see is that about 80% of all the energy that we're using in our homes goes to either space or water heating. The remaining about 20% or 18% is from electricity, and so that's mostly for appliances, perhaps some cooking, lighting, and so on. One thing that you may also notice is that while electricity only makes up 18% of the energy that we're using in our homes, it accounts for 28% of the electricity that we use. The reason for that is that in order to generate electricity, you have to burn raw fuels, at least from most of the standard perspective. We're not talking about renewables. When you're doing that, the generation of electricity, to convert those raw fuels into electricity, into usable electricity, and then to transmit it, has some efficiencies built into the process. So as a result, when you get down to it, the amount of electricity that we use ends up requiring more energy from the fuels that were burned in order to produce that. So it ends up having a greater greenhouse gas footprint than you might otherwise expect. Now the commercial and industrial sectors. As I was saying at the beginning of the presentation, there aren't a lot of good sources or even data available for the county level fuel use. So in order to come up with estimates for the commercial and industrial sector, what we did was we took the electricity use that we knew of from CMP that was tracked for each of those sectors, and then we compared it to the known amount of electricity that was used in those sectors at the state level. From that, they do have state level estimates for the amount of fuel and the types of fuel that are consumed. So we use that ratio of electrical usage to scale down state level estimates for fuel usage to the commercial and the industrial sectors. Now, for the commercial sector, we don't really expect the types and amounts of fuel choices to vary that much around the state. We're talking about offices, big box stores, commercial entities in general. So as a result, we have a fair amount of confidence in what this represents. Now, what you'll see in these graphs is that heating fuel oil makes up less of an amount than it does in the residential sector, only about 40%. Electricity plays a much larger part, nearly a third of all the energy used, and natural gas also is a bigger player than it was in the residential sector. And again, you'll notice that electricity, because of that inefficiency in the generation process, makes up nearly half of the emissions associated with that sector. Now contrast that to the industrial sector. What you'll probably notice right away is that wood makes up nearly 60% of all the energy that's used in this sector. Now again, keep in mind that these are state level estimates scaled down to the region based on the known amount of electricity that we use. One of the challenges with Cumberland County is that we don't have as much industrial activity as the rest of the state, and probably not the same types. We know Maine produces a lot of wood, for instance, but we're not doing a whole lot of timbering down in this county. However, keep in mind that with wood, one of the things about it is that you can burn it not only for heating, but with the industrial levels, oftentimes they're able to generate electricity on site. And so what we suspect is that a lot of this wood is actually going into CHP, or combined heat and power plants, on industrial scale. So even though they only use 99% of purchased electricity, there's probably a lot more that's actually being consumed on site. Another thing I just wanted to note here is that while wood does make up 60% of all the energy that's used, we don't see that it makes up 4% of the emissions. The reason for this is because wood is considered to be a biogenic fuel. And as a result, basically what that means is that wood is kind of considered, all the carbon in wood is to be considered in the existing carbon cycle. So you burn it, it goes into the atmosphere, trees take it up and produce new wood. As a result of that, compared to petroleum, which you pull out of the ground and add carbon into the atmosphere, The carbon dioxide emissions associated with the combustion of wood are not included in most greenhouse gas emissions inventories now, which is why it makes up such a small portion here. Now, I did want to talk about costs as well, because as we said, in 2007, $1.36 billion to the county. And where we're seeing most of that go, not surprisingly, is automobiles and transportation. Nearly $500 million went to powering our automobiles with gasoline, and another significant portion to diesel fuel for those as well. About a quarter of these costs, $313 million, went to purchasing electricity, and nearly $250 million went to heating fuel oil use in the county as well. That's a lot of data to throw at you. I just want to leave you with a couple of major trends to chew on as we move forward. For one, automobile transportation is absolutely driving energy costs, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions in the county, making up 40% of the region's energy use and 42% of all energy costs, nearly $600 million. Keep in mind that one of the challenges of automobile transportation is that it's a regional issue, and as a result, in order to tackle it, we need regional planning and collaboration. The other main point that I want to make is that residential energy use for home heating is also pretty significant, where 83% of home energy was likely used for space and water heating in 2007. And that 2/3 of all of that heating energy was from heating oil, which is not very surprising when you think that Maine as a state is the most reliant, people of Maine are the most reliant on heating oil than any other state in the country. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that with efficiency programs, it's easy to focus on electricity because it's easy to measure, but when over 80% of all the energy that we're using in our homes is going to heating, you might get more bang for your buck by focusing on heating and insulation as well. So the last thing I want to say is that this inventory that we created for Cumberland County, we're actually in the process of expanding to the entire of SustainSouthernMaine that Jack was talking about earlier. So that whole region runs from a lot of Cumberland County, including Durham and Androscoggin County, down into York County, all the way down to the border with New Hampshire. So the results of that will be forthcoming. We'll be posting it up on our website. All of these existing inventories and future inventories will be available at the site here, energy.tpcog.info. And I'll be happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you, Ben. And we will hold questions until the end of all presentations. Just a quick announcement that there's a flyer out on the sign-in table about the Greater Portland Sustainability Council's winter meeting tomorrow, which also includes another special session by a Muskie School group on policy innovations for our region.